Proxy warfare has become more common than conventional warfare due to the ease of operation, limited force commitments, and no exposure on the international front. Today on Tactical Talk, we will be discussing the use, impacts, and counter strategies of proxy warfare. Today, the guests of our show are Scott Rickard, a geopolitical commentator and former American intelligence linguist, and Khalid Muhammad, an author, defense analyst specializing in counter-terrorism. It's a pleasure to have you both on Tactical Talk. This is Zain Khan.
Hi, Zain. How are you? It's been a long time since we spoke.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I think it's very important that programs like yours get out there and inform individuals about the real world.
Scott, let's start with you. What exactly is proxy warfare and how does it differentiate from conventional warfare?
Proxy warfare is often used by other nations. Most of the time, it's very rich nations. They're used actually in areas where they want to go after different types of resources or political control. And they normally are done using either local revolutionaries or local individuals, as well as neighboring countries. And these proxy wars will go on for sometimes decades along end. Mostly because what happens is during proxy warfare is you have one country that's funding the overthrow or the intervention, or what the Americans like to refer to as the liberation of another country, when in fact it really is an incredibly wealthy individuals that are making a tremendous amount of profit. The military-industrial complex and the global resources like petroleum and other types of minerals are typically the driving factors, as well as the hegemony and political control of other countries that are gaining momentum in a region. A lot of countries independently will fund their own types of civil wars in order to combat these types of interventions by Western nations. But typically it's done in a fashion that is potentially extremely expensive to the nation. But and typically those countries are made in advance of any type of I guess political warfare, and those countries are put in a tremendous, pressure to respond, and typically governments are overthrown.
Scott, where does the need for using proxy to wage war on enemies stem from?
Typically, these needs are driven specifically by geopolitical influences. These geopolitical influences are ties to allies. Some of these allied ties go back hundreds of years, 500 years, for example, if you're looking at the Swedish and the British empires. These types of proxy wars are typically done where a nation decides, in fact, that they are either economically going to take over another nation, or B, they're going to politically destabilize a nation in order to not only control its resources, but obviously to control the success that country may be having, both geopolitically as well as regionally and economically. So typically it stems from economic warfare. World War I and World War II were great examples of economic warfare by the British Empire. You look at the tremendous amount of background of most proxy wars. They're typically resource-based for different types of natural resources, and then obviously they're geopolitically based, based upon different types of strategic locations for maritime services, for other types of defensive as well as offensive geographical locations. So a lot of times it's done as a strategy for further warfare. Other times it's done as strategy for different types of really military or economic operations.
Scott, give us some historical examples where proxy warfare has been applied and has achieved its desired results.
Achieved desired results. That's an interesting concept. I'm not certain that the desired results would be desired by everyone, but the desired results are typically, as I said, with both economic and military profiteering, as well as geopolitical and geographic strategic control. There have been many examples. The French, Mexican, and French wars in the 1800s, where the Americans were in a proxy war actually with the French at the same time. There have been tremendous amount of proxy wars over history. You look at even Sun Tzu says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. This is like one of the original out of the art of war, the types of proxy wars. But the proxy wars, I mean, Americans fighting proxy wars in on pretty much every continent in the world right now. If you look at right now, the Gaza is a proxy war that the Americans are fighting with their Israeli counterparts. And certainly, if you look at the types of proxy wars that the Americans are involved with on a daily basis, I mean, Ukraine is a proxy war, Syria is a proxy war, certainly Libya was a proxy war, although NATO did take a lot of type of, effort, as well as they took responsibility for it, but actually the people on the ground were proxy mercenaries that were hired by Western intelligence agencies to fabricate the revolution there. There are proxy wars that go back, obviously, into the 1800s and the 1900s. There were probably a dozen proxy wars during the Cold War, post-World War II, that the United States was involved in. These proxy wars are used typically to overthrow governments. There have been proxy wars, several against Iran, certainly many against adversaries, partners, specifically Russia. So these proxy wars and the history of proxy wars are very common, unfortunately become way too common in the 21st century. There are far more, if you look at history, more recently than there have ever been in the history of the world, because of the American military-industrial complex. There are basically over 900 bases in 150 countries across the world. Djibouti is a secret base for American operations in Africa, and there are basically hundreds of operations a year, probably 500 to 700 operations a year, secret wars going on in Africa that have been a part of AFRICOM, as well as the specific project AFRICAP. It's AFRICAP.
Why do countries which hold nuclear weapon arsenals are more prone to engage in proxy warfare?
Well, typically, the countries that hold nuclear weapons are more rich. There have been very few proxy wars by some of the newer nuclear powers, but typically the older nuclear powers have been involved in proxy wars by nature of their long dominant control of international waters, as well as their long dominant control. If you look at the Swedes and the United Kingdom, they've been allies for 500 years. Certainly, they've been involved in just a tremendous amount of proxy wars, and have developed nuclear warfare based upon the advancement of their technology and their military-industrial complexes. So Russia's been involved in some proxy wars, certainly typically defending themselves against Western imperialism. If you look at the history of Western imperialism, they've typically been led by France, the United Kingdom, obviously the United States, and then other NATO allies. These NATO allies obviously have gotten involved in all the proxy wars that the Americans have been involved in post-World War II, and many of the wars prior to World War II. So unfortunately, it's really not focused on the nuclear warfare as much as it is of the nuclear arsenal, as much as it is the ability to not only fund but also to gain enough support from just a myriad of allies. And it's these allies that have created the tremendous amount of proxy wars, the Western allies, the NATO allies.
Khalid, coming to you, what is Pakistan's role on the ongoing proxy war between the Arabs and the Iranians in the Middle East region?
Yeah, Pakistan's role has really been on a back foot. being that we've got our own war going on here, we don't get involved in the little games that are going on between the Arabs and the Iranis. You have to understand that this is a centuries-old war, and the Arabs and the Persians are going to fight each other until the end of time. And for Pakistan to get involved in this, it would be literally on the level of stupidity. Because for us to get involved in Yemen on the Saudi side, when we've got Iran on our border, is just asking for trouble. So it makes more sense for us to stay out.
Khalid, why does India prefer to apply the asymmetrical war doctrine on Pakistan to achieve its objectives?
Well, you have to understand, India can't really come across the border and start fighting us. They would have a lot of trouble in the international community if people start to realize that India was just coming across the border and starting trouble with Pakistan. So what India started to do is use different methods, from Bollywood movies where they attack our culture, Bollywood propaganda movies that they try and bump up their jingoistic beliefs, like Phantom is out right now, using different proxy groups like the TTP, the Baloch Liberation Groups, the Insurgent. These are all things done by an armed force that understands that if they come across the border, they are going to incite a lot of anger from the international community. And while Modi is going to, scream and yell as much as he wants about how much he hates Pakistan, how bad Pakistan is for the region, you really can't pick a fight with us because we are a nuclear power just like you are. And if you do pick that fight, well, we know how this one's going to end. This isn't 1971 anymore. And you're not ready for what Pakistan has in store for you. This country, based on a recent poll by Gallup Pakistan, 80% of Pakistanis will stand and defend the country. And I don't think you'll get that same number out of India. So the asymmetrical warfare doctrine that India has moved with is more of an intent to weaken Pakistan from a mental standpoint so that they can make an easy march in and take the country from us. And that's just not going to happen.
What is the role of the media and opinion makers in countering such warfare dynamics, Khalid?
Here's the interesting part. I mean, you would expect, if you look back at 9/11, you saw the media, Hollywood, opinion makers, everyone got onto one page with the government. And when they got on that same page, everyone said the same thing, everyone followed the same speech, everyone followed the same logic. There was no divergence of any kind from the U.S. government position on what the response to 9/11 was. When we turn around and look at Pakistan, in our country, since 2001, we've been fighting against terrorism as a frontline state. We all understand that. In 2007, our fight became very bloody. It was after Lal Masjid when all the militant groups came together and they formed the TTP. When they did that, we saw the media split. We saw opinion makers split because I don't want to say it as harshly as this, but there's really no other way to say it. You weren't ready for the bloodshed that came, and to save your own butts, you decided, well, we'll hold the center line rather than holding the position that we should stand against all terrorists, whether they be facilitators, apologists, or actual terrorists themselves. The media and the opinion makers should have worked with the government to develop a narrative that could be pushed to the Pakistani people, that we would understand, that we would be able to get behind the effort, stand with the country, and defend our nation. Sadly, that didn't happen. And there are a number of columnists, there are a number of analysts who appear on television who have been branded as warmongers because we all took the position that, we need to go to war, we need to fight, we need to defend our country, because no one was giving us any other option. You have to understand that if the media doesn't do its job, other people are going to step up and do the media's job for it. And we saw that with the TTP. Every time they carried out a successful strike, a DVD would come out where they would show the whole thing off, the training. The person that went, he would give you his speech about why he was doing it. They got their messaging right. We still haven't gotten ours right.
Thank you so much, Scott Rickard and Khalid Muhammad, to be in our show.
Thank you, Zain.
Thank you again, Zain. I appreciate being on the show. It's great to have these types of things talked about. They're excellent questions, and look forward to doing it again next time.
This was Scott Rickard and Khalid Muhammad discussing proxy warfare in detail, past, present, and future. Until the next episode, this is Zain Khan. Take care and goodbye.